Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board.
A diesel-powered engine on a farm works hard and operates in a grueling environment. Soy biodiesel fuels stand up to the challenge of powering farm equipment, but are also renewable and environmentally responsible as well. The Nebraska Soybean Board is committed to encouraging the use of soy biodiesel to protect the environment and sustain Nebraska's agriculture. The Nebraska Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up.
Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine, and major funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board. The Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up.
Welcome to this week's edition of Market Journal. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. On this episode, Ed Ussett talks about 5 common mistakes in grain marketing. Steve Pagler explains why some soybean growers can now retain and plant certain Roundup-ready seed. Tina Barrett outlines the extension of Section 179. Ronnie Green discusses climate change and genetic modification. And Bryce Anderson gives his outlook for winter weather in Nebraska. Ed Ussett from the University of Minnesota joins us this week for a unique view of marketing. Ed spoke at the recent Soybean Day and Machinery Expo in Wahoo about 5 common mistakes in grain marketing. Ed's approach is about having a proactive, not reactive or overactive strategy when it comes to pricing corn, soybeans, or wheat. As he said when we talked at the event, great marketing is not about finding the high price, it's about finding an extra 10 to 20 cents per bushel. We started our discussion by asking why.
Well, I'm just trying to get people to think differently about marketing rather than thinking about finding the high, when corn prices will peak and what day. My message is that's a hard game to play and a hard game to play well and consistently. Think instead about eliminating mistakes. My analogy is your favorite football team. They don't have to run any faster. They don't have to jump any higher to be any better if they'll just quit jumping offside on 3rd down and 2 or quit throwing interceptions at a crucial point in the game. They're that much better. They're that much more competitive.
When you say eliminate mistakes, does that mean eliminating losses or eliminating emotion?
I've got 5 specific mistakes I talk about. One is the reluctance towards pricing before harvest. A lot of people are still afraid to price early. Another mistake is understanding basis, your local price relative to futures. Another mistake is the lack of an exit strategy. Jeff, you've got a lot of farmers in Nebraska, in my home state of Minnesota and Iowa, who have taken their crop and they put it in the bin and they're waiting. And what I'll ask them is, you're waiting for what? You're waiting for what? 20 cents more, 50 cents more? We've had a heck of a rally lately. And of course, very few people put a number on it, and I think that's a problem. Another mistake is related to that one, holding grain too long. We have people who hold it right up to the next harvest. And I'm going to show today why that's a losing strategy, even though it has its years, its moments. And finally, carrying charges, the difference between different futures delivery months, the difference in price between December and March corn. It's fundamental to understanding grain markets.
Tell me more about the advantage to pre-harvest pricing.
Well, there's a tendency for futures prices and cash prices to be higher in the spring than they are in the fall. Now, having said that, Jeff, you've got people viewing this right now who are going to say, yeah, but I remember 2012, I remember this year, I remember that year when the price at harvest was higher. Yeah, it happens. But in the case of corn and soybeans, that's 1 out of 4 or 1 out of 3 years. The other 2 out of 3 or 3 out of 4 years, it's higher in the spring than it is in the fall.
You also mentioned basis. Why is it so critical to track where your basis is locally every single year?
Well, basis is what what ties your local price to the futures price, it's probably the smallest of the 5 mistakes, smallest in terms of an opportunity to improve, and yet basis tells us so much about local supply and demand, and producers just tend to focus on the board. Was the Board of Trade up 5 cents or down 5 cents? We should also be paying attention to that local basis. Tells us more about our local supply and demand.
As you said, another mistake is not having an exit strategy. Does that mean setting a price or setting a date when you should be out of the market?
One or the other. I'm glad you said setting a price or a date. I'll take either one. Just have one. I tell producers that the most, I know what they're waiting for with grain in the bin. They're waiting for another 25 cents. That's what they're waiting for. And of course, if we get another 25 cents, we wait for another 25 cents. And of course, it never has an end. Put a date on it, put a time on it, put a price on it, and stick to it.
Do you go by a hard floor every single year or a hard date that you want to be out of your cash grain?
Yes, July 1. I call it the 11th commandment of grain marketing. Thou shalt not hold cash grain beyond July 1. That's for corn and soybeans. If you're a wheat producer and holding wheat, that date should be June 1.
Will this take out the day-to-day market swings? Sort of watching the market every day and riding it up and then riding back down if you develop a plan like this?
I think it helps. I think people who have a plan, I mean, I hate to preach ignorance. Don't pay attention to the market. You have to pay attention to it. But people who have a plan and intend to stick by it, they tune out the noise a little more because they know what they're trying to accomplish. If the market's not there, they say, be patient, it'll get there. They know when they're going to take action.
Ed has more information about developing a marketing plan available on his website. We'll link to that on the Market Journal homepage. Next week, North Dakota State Extension economist Frayne Olson will join us to talk about his expectations for corn, soybean, and wheat acres in 2015. In 1996, farmers had the opportunity to begin planting Roundup-ready soybeans from Monsanto. The patent on Monsanto's first-generation Roundup-ready soybean trait expires in 2015. In Wahoo, we talked with Steve Pagler from the Nebraska Crop Improvement Association, a main seed certifying agency in the state, about whether or not growers can use seed from the 2014 harvest when planting the 2015 crop this spring.
Well, it's a little bit more complicated than just the Roundup Ready 1 trait going off patent. While that's true, a lot of the Roundup Ready 1 varieties themselves are still patented. So you have to check with your supplier to see whether or not they have a variety available that the variety itself isn't patented by the variety owner. Because
why? They have their own patents on it?
Well, I think that was a way to protect themselves because they could see coming down the road that the Monsanto patent, the Roundup Ready 1 patent, was going to go away. They wanted to protect their varieties so that they would still have royalties coming into their research programs.
In the case that a farmer would check with that seed company and find out that you would be able to use it, what are the difficulties in using that seed, planting it for the next spring?
Well, for most people, it's been 15 or 20 years since they've had to save seed, and they probably haven't even thought about it. And if they're a younger farmer, they have no idea what that's like. You have to, have an isolated field. You have to clean your combine out. You have to have somewhere to store that seed. You have to find somewhere to clean that seed. You're going to need to have it tested for purity and germination and that sort of thing. And those are all things you have to think about, whether or not that's worth it.
How time-consuming is that?
Well, it could take quite a bit out of your time, especially if you're an average farmer and you have 1,000 acres and 500 of that is soybeans. That's a lot of seed to deal with, and it might just be easier to go back to your supplier if you have a variety that you like.
Is it difficult to find seed cleaners anymore?
Yeah, especially for a corn and soybean farmer. If you go to the Nebraska Crop Improvement site, people that belong to our association, we have a network of approved seed conditioners. And many of those, at least in the eastern and central part of the state, are familiar with cleaning soybeans, but you may not even be near one of those people. And so, there just aren't the mobile seed cleaners around like there used to be.
What would be the benefits to keeping it back and planting and using it?
You know, the savings of the seed cost, but you have to balance that out with the time and effort it takes to do that. And really, you know, that should be a minimal factor in your operation. It should be, you know, is it quality seed and you know, is it a variety that works? And a lot of the Roundup Ready 1 varieties, not all of them, but a lot of them are older, and so the genetics aren't as good. And so the main thing is to focus on, does that variety yield for you?
What restrictions would be placed on it if you are growing it in terms of fields you can use it in or selling it to others?
Well, there shouldn't be any restrictions on what fields you can plant it in, but you know, most of the licenses that your supplier would have wouldn't allow them to say, sell it to you and say, go ahead and reproduce that and sell it to somebody else. You know, that's not something that you're actually supposed to do.
Next week, we'll talk about seed selection in corn and see how picking the right variety can help manage disease. Country of origin labeling, or COOL, remains a hot topic across agriculture, both here and abroad. In the December Nebraska Farmer, Nebraska Extension Public Policy Specialist Brad Lubin takes an in-depth look at the issues surrounding COOL. Lubin says the World Trade Organization's recent ruling on COOL contains mixed conclusions and creates several questions about COOL's future. He says it appears the U.S. is formulating plans to appeal the decision in early 2015. You can read more about this in the December Nebraska Farmer. Late last week, Congress passed and the President signed an extension for several tax provisions through December 31st, 2014. One of those relating to agriculture was the $1 per gallon biodiesel credit. Another deals with depreciation. Tina Barrett from Nebraska Farm Business, Inc. joined us recently to discuss the extension of Section 179.
Yeah, that's the big thing in this bill that relates to farmers. So Section 179 is back. Again, that's just the expense election we have to write off capital purchases in the first year. So we've had that for quite a while. It's always been in tax law, but we're back at it. We're using $500,000 of it instead of $25,000 that we were thinking.
And the bonus depreciation?
Bonus is back as well. So let me go. This little difference between bonus. Both are accelerated depreciations. 179 works on new or used property. Must have a life class of less than 20 years. Bonus depreciation is only new property. So I always say plastic on the seat's kind of new. It has to be. You have to have first use of it. But it's life class of 20 years or less. So there's a big difference in that 20 years or less and less than 20 years in the fact that farm buildings qualify for machine shed or for bonus depreciation. So if you put up a farm building this year, that's going to be big.
Now we realize that we're late in December talking about this. Do you need to have bought it or do you need to have it in possession?
So the definition of it needs to be placed in service or available for use. So combine needs to be on your place in order to really technically be able to deduct it. Building needs to be up and available for use. Like a pivot, you might not be going to use it. As long as it can make a circle, now you're okay. But in a pile at the edge of the field would not be placed in service.
January 1 reverts back to what?
Back to no bonus and $25,000 of 179 as long, and the purchase limit, which we don't talk about a lot, is $200,000. So if you spend more than $200,000 next year, you don't even get to use the 179, the $25,000. With the increased limit of $500,000, we have a $2 million purchase limit, and most people can kind of stay under that one.
I think when we talked last time, we talked about the dichotomy between crop and livestock producers this year. When is it smart to use this?
Yeah, well, I think in either case, we need to step back when you're making purchases and think about it from a management standpoint first, because it doesn't make sense to spend $100,000 on anything just for a $30,000 tax write-off if you don't need it. So think about it, all your purchases from a management standpoint first, and then we make a decision on how that affects our taxes. But regardless, we're taking an expense that you're maybe going to pay for over the next 7 years. And taking it all today. So we need to think about things like if you're going to finance that asset, you got to make principal payments in the next couple of years. The only offset that you would have in the future for that is depreciation. If you take it all today, you're going to be needing to generate higher taxable incomes in the future in order to cash flow. So think about it if you're financing it. All those kinds of things are big, but the crop guys are going to be looking at things a little different than the livestock guys this year. Most of the crop guys have spent everything that they've wanted in the last few years, and we're looking at lower incomes coming forward when we need to make those payments. So it maybe isn't as smart to go out and do that this year as it has been in the past. Livestock guys, on the other hand, the first time we've got some cash laying around, and Using this to upgrade equipment, maybe improve the breeding herd, those kinds of things are all good choices, again, as long as it makes sense in your management plan.
As we get ready for 2015, you said one of the things that's maybe important to keep in mind is inventory carryover. In what sense?
Right. Well, I think, and from a livestock standpoint, we can look at the crop guys and what they've done for the last 4 or 5 years and maybe learn some lessons. But some of the crop producers have carried over tons of inventories and built huge amounts trying to avoid taxes. And now we're coming into a place where we need to keep paying taxes at that higher level because we've pushed so much inventory forward. And now there's not going to be as much profit to use to pay those taxes. So maybe just don't be afraid of paying some taxes. We don't want to pay more than you need to, but as profitability goes up, your tax liability is going to go up.
Now we know that costs of production are going up for crop producers, at least the margins are getting tighter, I guess I should say. When you look at 2015 cost of living, reiterate to me where it is right now and why that's important.
Yeah, well, for 2013 we saw an average cost of living of about $100,000 plus another $40,000 for income taxes. And then if we factor in things like non-farm capital purchases, other things like that, on average the producers took out about $200,000 from the farm. And which is fine when we were making money. The question is it going to be something that can be pulled down? And we've looked at our numbers since 1977, and family living has never decreased in that time period. Maybe $100 or something, but so we have some steady, but never a significant decrease. So it's going to be very interesting as to see if that is something that can pull down when profitability comes down, or if we're at a new level, because if we're looking at farm incomes of $40,000 and family living at $100,000, we're going to be going backwards pretty fast.
On the Market Journal website, we'll link to Tina's recent CropWatch article about the extension of tax provisions. Earlier this year, we told you about a report from UNL's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources that showed the average temperature in Nebraska would increase anywhere from 4 to 9 degrees by the end of this century. The report was featured in the first Heuermann Lecture Series presentation of 2014. Of the 4 lectures this year, 2 center around climate change and 1 will discuss genetic modification. Ronnie Green is the Institute's Vice Chancellor and also serves as Vice President of the University of Nebraska System. We talked with him recently about these topics, which are arguably 2 of the most controversial around agriculture today, and asked why he felt it was important to highlight these issues.
Well, different reasons for the 2. The climate change area in particular is one that has such big potential ramifications, already having ramifications on agriculture for us locally in Nebraska, but certainly regionally, nationally, globally, it's a major issue and challenge that lies ahead for us. And so we felt that it was very important to bring attention to that. These are the kinds of things that we need to be planning for in the way that we produce food and fiber and feed from our industries, and what that means.
Yeah, let's talk about genetic engineering. Number one, how has agriculture not been able to secure consumer acceptance to this, and how do they then go about trying to inform consumers about what GE products are?
Well, I can remember when the first genetic engineering discussions first began to be talked about. And as you know, and some of your listeners will know, I'm a geneticist by trade. And so I remember in the 1980s when this began to be discussed, the technologies were coming online where we could begin to think about what might we be able to do if we could transfer this characteristic into a genome and get that expressed in the genome in a way that would be positive and create a positive attribute to a plant species or to an animal species ultimately. The initial products that have been put into the marketplace very successfully for very good reason with very big impact. The BT products, huge impact on the agricultural industry and the production sector, have been production enhancements, not health enhancements. Taking like the recently approved potato, for example, that Simplot is now bringing to market, that has characteristics relative to the product itself, right? So anti-browning, so that reduces waste, reduces the food waste problem that's huge out in our public. And oh, by the way, there's a health benefit to this thing too. In the content, the chemical profile and nutrient content of the potato that is good for human health, right? Yeah. So let's go backward and think 30 years ago. If that had been the first product, instead of BT products on the production side, I'm speculating, but I believe there would have been a different reaction.
It seems like the supporters and those in opposition to climate change and genetic engineering are at times conflicting. And what I mean by that is sometimes on one side they'll believe the science, and on the other side they won't believe the science.
Yeah. So I had the opportunity to be involved in leading a debate at the Sigma Xi conclave, the International Sigma Xi conclave in Arizona in November. And Sigma Xi is the honor society for science. So it's an organization made up of a large number of scientists around the world. And an interesting thing came out of that debate, because I asked the group around the table, so these 40 people, do you believe the science that indicates that the climate is changing because of these various reasons, and what the implications can be of that change in the future? And I took a poll, so raise your hand. 100% of the people in the room raised their hand, okay? Realizing 2/3 of these people were scientists by trade. Then I asked them, now let's switch to GMOs and GMO products and labeling of GMO products. Do you believe the science that has gone into the production of those products, the safety and use of those products, and the science that says they are absolutely safe to be used? Roughly 1/3 of the hands went up. So there's a real, I guess the word I would use, disconnect, is you have 2/3 of the room who are scientists, who are trained in the scientific method, who believe in the process of science, who are discounting the science on one side and completely believing the science on another side. And I could use 3 or 4 or 5 other examples that you could get the same result. So to me, that says there are other things out there driving beliefs and an understanding of some of these technologies than the science.
The next Heuermann Lecture takes place January 13th at 7 p.m. on Innovation Campus. The discussion will focus on genetically modified animals. In place of our normal weekly weather forecast, this week we'll hear from DTN Senior Ag Meteorologist Bryce Anderson. The world's second and third largest soybean producers, Brazil and Argentina, are now in their growing seasons for beans, while the U.S., the world's leading producer, is now in its off-season. We talked with Bryce at the Soybean Day in Wahoo last week about scenarios for both regions, starting with the precipitation outlook for this state during winter.
Well, moisture during the winter here in Nebraska is going to be generally near normal the way things are playing out. We've had some rain, we've had some snow, and nothing really out of line at all. I think that the best chance for above normal precipitation will be in the southwestern part of the state because of an influence from at least a weak El Nino with a little bit more moisture trailing in. And we started to see some of that here during the month of December with a few of these weather systems coming in out of California and the Four Corners area.
You mentioned El Nino before. Reinforce to me what that means just in the general weather scene here in Nebraska.
Well, with El Nino, in effect, the Pacific being warmer than average and the trade wind patterns having a little bit more of an active subtropical jet stream, we tend to see a higher amount of moisture in the southwestern plains making its way into southwestern Nebraska. Now, over the remainder of the state, we're going to be on the edge because farther to the east, over the Great Lakes and the Eastern Corn Belt, they generally stay a little bit drier, so we're kind of in between those two moisture patterns. Temperatures are fairly mild, and I think that's a big takeaway considering the fact that, you know, last winter it was so cold for so long.
Does that hold out then through winter, the mild temperatures?
I think we're going to see that. There will be some shots of some kind of colder air, but it doesn't look at this point like the polar vortex is going to, you know, forge its way south and just, you know, make a make a return, and that's not even a good weather term, but you know, the influence of the polar vortex was so big last winter, doesn't look like it's going to be that way this winter.
Let's move south to Brazil and Argentina. What is it like, or what has it been like during their planting year for soybeans?
Brazil started out on the dry side, especially over the major soybean grower, Mato Grosso province. But the rains began around early November, and the rainy season has definitely set in. We've seen moisture over the past couple weeks of anywhere from 3 to 6 inches of rainfall, and that's over the entire Brazil soybean belt. The official projection from the Brazil Ag Department is that their soybean crop is going to be 95 million tons, which would be a new record, but it could be as high as 98, considering the kind of improvement that they've had.
But when is the critical period for that growing region?
Well, the critical period is coming up now in January and February for the majority of their soybean crop. Same story in Argentina. But the way things are developing, and with at least a weak El Nino going on, there's a very low likelihood that they're going to all of a sudden turn around and get into a hot and dry period. It's not out of the question, but the likelihood is quite low.
That precipitation that you mentioned, is that about average?
That's a little bit above average, actually, for the season. But considering how dry things were, they'll take it, and you know, their crops are obviously making use of it.
What about temperatures there during the growing season?
Temperatures are going to be pretty mild. You know, warm. You know, a lot of 90+ degree days. But with clouds and rain, we know what that does. You know, that takes that temperature and kind of levels it out, kind of flattens it out somewhat.
Al will return in January after UNL's holiday shutdown with his normal weekly weather forecast. Today's interviews can be found on the Market Journal website and through the Market Journal mobile app. They include information on marketing strategies, planting Roundup Ready seed, Section 179, climate change and genetic modification, and the weather forecast for Brazil and Argentina's growing season. As always, you can follow Market Journal during the week on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Next week, Frayne Olson will talk about total planting acres in 2015, and David Cole will discuss the current state of agriculture. Until then, thanks for watching. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. We'll see you next week.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board. The Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board.